Rather than setting out blindly, Tobias decided to go into Punta Raza and talk to Captain Hendley concerning the location of Okeechobee. He was told that the Calistachie flows from the lake's western shore. Thus he could follow the river to its source and then turn south towards the Great Swamp. From this general description of its location, Tobias figured that one of their grazing drives they had come to within 20 miles or so of the lake's north shore without even knowing it. Captain Hendry also warned him that the land south of the lake was virtually unknown, a wilderness not yet penetrated except by Indians. He thought such a journey as Tobias proposed was foolhardy, but he made no headway in trying to dissuade him. It was the early next morning when Tobias and Zek departed for the others at the ferry's landing. Emma said a fearful goodbye, imploring Tobias to abandon the drive and turn back if the trip became too dangerous. Skillet offered once again to go with them, but was refused. The area along the river was heavily wooded, so they moved outward and chose a path parallel to a marsh, giving them much more control over the cattle. This time they did not let the cows set the pace, wandering slowly but grazed them for an hour at a time and then moved forward at a steady pace. Zek noticed that several times during the next 2 days, Tobias slumped forward in the saddle as if in pain, and this perplexed and worried him. Always before, Tobias had been alert and attentive to the cattle, but sometimes now he seemed to drift along aimlessly without giving his horse directions. When Zek rode to him and questioned him, Tobias snapped back to alertness, assuring him that he had merely dozed for a moment because of the intense heat. Once at night, Zek heard him groaning in his sleep, and he went to him. Tobias was drenched in sweat. On the 4th day, they struck the western shore of Okeechobee, marveling at the seemingly endless expanse of water before them. The shimmering surface stretched into the horizon and gave no hint of a distant shore. Vast areas of blooming pickerel weed lined the water's edge, creating a sea of soft blue that merged gently with clumps of willows and little islands of buttonbush with creamy white flowers. Nearby, rookeries exploded with birds, green-blue herons and snowy egrets, white herons and wood ibises, whooping cranes, and anahingas with their wings spread outward to dry them. Cormorants dived beneath the surface and popped up unexpectedly 50 feet away, startling flocks of ducks and coot that had peppered the surface. Majestic spoonbills stalked up and down the shallows, swishing their long paddle bills from side to side as they raked the bottom in search of food, their pink feathers catching the sunlight and making them appear even pinker. Lech insisted they stop for a day or two and let the cattle graze on the abundant grass, but he was more interested in rest for his father than the food for the cows. Tobias agreed reluctantly, wanting to push on immediately, but in his weakened condition he allowed himself to be overruled. After making camp beneath a thick covering of alders, they walked back to the shore and watched the unfamiliar sights with fascination, seeking an endless parade of nature's creatures. Willows were so loaded with chattering red-winged blackbirds that it seemed the tree limbs would surely break, and fish were so plentiful their fins cut the calm surface with constant ripples. Zek took his fishing line from a saddlebag, cut a cane pole, and caught crickets for bait. And in only moments he caught more black bass and catfish than they could hope to eat. On the way back to the camp, he gathered figs from a thick grove of wild trees, and for supper they had fish roasted over an open fire, followed by a sugary fruit. That night the eerie call of limpkins blended with the croaking of bullfrogs and the grunting of alligators, forming a strange type of music never heard out on the prairie. Tobias moved closer to the warming fire and said, "I'm sure glad we stopped here, Zek. I've never seen a place so full of life. Not even back in the shrub. scrub. I can see now why some of the Indians that ran off from here hid in the swamps, hoping to come back someday. I hope they can, but I got a notion they won't. When folks find out what's here, they'll likely take it over, and you won't ever see an Indian on this lake's shore. Maybe someday we can come back and see it all. I sure hope so. James Tiger told me that there can be waves out there taller than a man, and at some places there's sand dunes like at the ocean. He also told me that the sun sucks water from the lake and it'll drop down several inches during the day, and then during the night it'll come right back up to where it was. I'd sure like to see that too. Maybe someday, Tobias said again, but right now I think I'll sleep. I feel kind of tired after all the through and through, like a wore-out old ox. You ain't old at all, Papa, but you need to get some rest. I'll stay up tonight and take care of the cows. 2 days stretched into 3. Tobias gained strength from the fresh fish, wild fruits, and berries. On the morning of the 3rd day, they broke camp and continued the drive, skirting the rim of the lake. But when they rounded the western shore and attempted to head directly south, they were met with a stretch of sawgrass with blades so sharp it prohibited the entrance of cows, men, and horses. At that point, they turned to the southwest and entered a custard apple forest, a jungle unlike anything they had ever encountered. Trees were so dense they formed a barrier, almost as impenetrable as the sawgrass. The sky was blocked out immediately by leafy branches, completely covered by a solid blanket of moon vines, turning a bright noonday sun to a dim twilight. The cows walked single file to make their way through the wall of trunks, and there was no way to drive them in a straight line. They skirted masses of dead limbs long since blown down by hurricanes, and gourd vines looping from branch to branch formed a curtain of green fruit. Trees were peppered with air plants that blossomed with brilliant red and orange flowers, and the ground beneath was totally bare, except for lush beds of ferns, some ground level and others as tall as the horses. The forest also teemed with Carolina parakeets as numerous as were the blackbirds at the lake, and low-hanging limbs were anchored to the ground by giant spider webs. Once Zek threw a stick into one of the webs in a useless attempt to break through. It sang like a violin strings and held fast, causing the huge brown and yellow spiders to rush forward and examine the captured missile. Every foot of the way was blocked by something: trunks, tangling vines, webs, grotesque outcroppings of roots. They turned, zigzagged, and backtracked, popping the whips and cursing the bewildered cows, moving tortuously through an atmosphere so murky they couldn't determine if they were heading south or north. And in one 4-hour stretch, they traveled less than a mile. There was no sunset that afternoon beneath the solid roof of the jungle, only a fleeting moment when twilight turned to instant darkness. Zek built a fire and then huddled together, hearing the chilling cry of sentinel hawks and the mournful song of whippoorwills. Screech owls then joined the chorus, making the cows all come together in a tight circle. Zek suggested time and again they turn back and seek another way, but each time Tobias shook his head in disagreement. It is impossible to tell when dawn came, and when finally a dawn yellow light drifted down through the vines, it could as well have been noon as mid-morning. They moved again, repeating the experience of the previous day, turning, twisting, probing mile after mile of the same frustration. Even Tobias now worried about the cows and the horses, since there was nothing for them to eat but ferns. He hoped the lazy outgrowths were not poisonous. Another night was spent beneath the canopy, then another morning vainly searching for an escape route. Just when they both became resigned to the fact that they were hopelessly trapped, they broke free at mid-afternoon and entered a marsh. The cows and horses grazed ravenously, and Tobias agreed to stop for the night. After building a fire, Zek walked back to the edge of the forest. He stepped gingerly onto the moon vines and jumped up and down, finding the green carpet to be solid as a bed. Then he walked upwardly slowly, one step at a time, until he reached the top of the trees and stood on the jungle's roof. The vines stretched away as far as he could see, like a verdant plain splotched with blooming white flowers. He walked forward at first cautiously and then with confidence, traveling 100 yards before turning back reluctantly, wishing he could retrace the entire distance they had come, but knowing he should return to Tobias. As he made his way down the leafy incline and onto the solid ground again, he trembled with excitement, feeling he now had a newfound secret not to be shared. Like a baby eagle no longer earthbound, drunk with exhilaration on its first flight. The thrill of the experience carried over past supper and into the night as they moved away at dawn. Zek looked back with both fear and joy at the giant tent nature had created over the forest. The marsh dissipated rapidly, and they came to the edge of the place they were seeking, the great cypress swamp. At first the land was peppered with small dwarf cypress and pond cypress. Then suddenly, there looming before them the mighty virgin bald cypress trees themselves, reaching up to 150 feet in the air, some with bases 70 feet in circumference. Cypress knees sprang up all around the base of the trees like giant mushrooms, some shaped like deformed human heads, some like birds, others like animals, creating a wooden menagerie. Wild orchids clung to every limb, turning the somber trees into color bursts of yellow and white and green and purple. There were also gumbo limbo trees, lancewoods, bushes, oaks, festooned with Spanish moss, and the awesome magnolias with leaf-covered limbs reaching 60 feet outward and then downward to the ground like a mother hen protecting her brood with a covering of wing feathers. Piercing all of this were royal palms whose bare trunks towered above some of the bald cypress, forming little umbrellas of fronds high in the sky. At first they stopped and stared, comparing the giant bald cypress to the little matchsticks that form cypress stands on the prairie. And then they moved forward again. The ground was dry, but they could see water marks several inches up the cypress knees where water normally reached. They passed easily over dry sloughs that once would have been forded and skirted around ponds covered solidly with lily pads and green slime. Cottonmouth moccasins scurried away beneath the surface and left trail marks, and the snouts of alligators poked upward like dead logs, their eyes open and blank as intruders passed by. They were also greeted by hordes of mosquitoes, not a solid mass like the cloud at the salt marsh, but a constant annoyance. Zach and Tobias both slapped and scratched, wondering how the Indians who lived here could even stand it. They could see areas of the bases of the trees where panthers scratched the bark to shreds, sharpening their claws, and the horses stepped around holes rooted out by wild hogs searching for food. The deeper they penetrated the swamp, the thicker became the trees and other foliage, until finally they faced obstacles almost as formidable as the custard apple forest. Once again they zigzagged and backtracked, searching for open paths, having difficulty controlling the cows. Zek was worried, wondering if there was no end to this alien land, and also noticing that Tobias was slumping forward in the saddle, sweat pouring from his face and staining his shirt. He did not believe there was even a bare possibility of finding the Indian village in such an overwhelming swamp that to continue was foolish and useless. But Tobias would not give up, would not turn back. For 2 days they passed no pond or stream where the water looked drinkable, and at night they rationed themselves to 1 cup from the canteens. Supper was limited to a thin twist of dry beef and rock-hard biscuit. On the 3rd night in the swamp, they were sitting by a fire, hoping the smoke would drive away the mosquitoes, when a man stepped out from the shadows and confronted them. He was dressed in a multicolored shirt that came down to his knees, deerskin trousers, moccasins, deerskin leggings, and a cross-finger woven sash with long fringes. From his neck downward over his chest hung a gorget fashioned from silver coins hammered thin, and on his head he wore a turban crowned with an egret plume. Both Zek and Tobias were startled, and both scrambled to their feet as the man said, "Do not be frightened. I bear no arms, not even a spear. We have known you were coming this way since you left the custard apple forest." Tobias calmed himself, and then he said, "My name is Tobias McIvy, and this is my son Zek. We're looking for the village of Keith Tiger. I am Tony Cypress, father of Willie Cypress. We know who you are. I will come back at daybreak and lead you to the village. Your cattle will become lost in the darkness if you follow me now. How do you know who I am? Tobias questioned, puzzled. We trust no one and we watch intruders. You were described today to Keith Tiger, and he said it was Tobias McIvy. He does not understand why you drive cattle into the swamp. Do you know what has happened to your son and James Tiger? Tobias asked cautiously. They were sent to find you and buy cattle, but they have not returned. We sent runners searching for them as far south as south shore of the Okeechobee, but did not find them. Do you have news on them? Tobias dared not tell him of the hanging to Tony Cypress alone, fearing the reaction. He would feel safer telling the news to a friend. He said, We have seen them, and we can talk of this tomorrow with you and Keith Tiger. There is no need to discuss this now. Do you have food? Not much, but enough to do for us now. I will return at daybreak. Watch your cows closely. Since the deer are scarce, the panthers are hungry and will attack anything. Do not let your fire go out. The Indian then stepped backwards and disappeared into the darkness. Zach threw more sticks into the fire and watched as a stream of sparks drifted upwards, glowing briefly like fireflies. Then he took the Winchester from his saddle holster and placed it beside him on the blanket. He said, Papa, what are you going to do if they blame us for what happened to James and Willie? I've been thinking about that too. Fact is, I thought about it all the way down here, and I do not have an answer yet. I just don't really know. We'll have to wait and see what happens. If I were Tony Cypress, and it was you hung instead of Willie, I'm not sure myself what I would do. There was a dozen chickens in the village, small open-sided huts constructed of cypress poles with roofs of thatched palmetto fronds and bare grass. Beneath one, a black cooking pot was tended by an old woman stirring constantly with a wooden paddle. All of the men were dressed similarly to Tony Cypress, and the women wore multicolored ankle-length dresses with a dozen strands of glass beads around their necks. On top of each one's head was a tight ball of hair held fast by black netting. At the fringe of the clearing there were several clumps of banana trees and a small garden pot containing wilted tomato plants, okra, squash, and corn that had turned brown prematurely from the lack of rain. Everyone in the village watched curiously as the cows invaded the clearing and milled about. Tobias and Zach rode in and dismounted and then followed Tony Cyrus to one of the chickens. Keith Tiger was sitting on the ground. And when he looked up and recognized the visitors, he motioned for them to come sit with him. He looked older than Tobias remembered, and his hair was now completely white. Tobias said, It is good to see you again, Keith Tiger. And you too, Tobias, he answered, a smile creasing his face. I am told by Tony Cyrus that you bring news of my grandson and Willie Cypress. Yes, I do, but first there are other things, Tobias said, wanting to delay the inevitable as long as possible. The cattle are for your people, and we have brought you gifts. Go and get them, Zach. Zach went to the horses and returned in a moment, placing boxes on the ground and handing 2 rifles to Tobias. He passed them on to Keith Tiger and said, These are Winchester repeaters, a rifle that shoots 17 times in one load. We also brought 2 cases of bullets, enough to last you for a long time. Tiger examined one of the rifles and passed the other to Tony Cypress. I've never seen such as this. How does this work? You just put the bullets in the magazine under the barrel, and when you pull a lever, the bullet goes into the chamber. It shoots as fast as you pump the lever till the bullets are gone. It will bring a deer down at 100 yards or more. Tiger stroked the stock with his hand, saying, This will be a great help to us. I thank you, Tobias. The bow and arrow is almost useless in the swamp. You shoot at a deer and hit vines or trees instead. It's not like hunting on the open prairie. For here, we need guns and bullets. This weapon will provide much food. Maybe you can shoot skeeters with it too, Tobias said jokingly, pleased by the reaction of the gift. I don't see how you folks stand it in here all the time. We've grown used to them, Tiger responded. There are many things we've been forced to learn since hiding here in the swamp. When our people lived on the land that is now Tallahassee, the soil there grew corn and beans and squash and pumpkins in abundance. Here things do not grow as well. It's the same with hunting. When there is no rain, the swamp dries up and animals go elsewhere. And when there's great rain, it floods, also driving them away or drowning them. There is also something facing us which we must overcome. It's been difficult, but we survived. But tell me now, what is it that you drive in the cattle instead of James and Willie? What is your news of them? Tobias knew he could no longer delay. He spoke slowly, recounting the claim of events in his mind. They found us on the prairie north of the Callisahatchee and explained their mission. They spent the night in our camp and left at daybreak the next morning. Zek offered to ride with them and help drive the cattle, but was refused. They said they could handle it alone, and that was the last we saw of them. It was several weeks before we reached Punta Rasa with the herd. As we left the village, I saw the cows with my mark on them and another man's herd. I questioned him about this, and he said he took them from rustlers down close to Okeechobee. Then Tiger broke in and asked anxiously, if someone stole the cattle from James and Willie, why did they not return here and tell us of this? Where are they now? I asked them who the rustlers were, Tobias responded hesitantly, and they told me it was 2 Indian boys. Then I asked what happened to the boys, and the man owned the herd told me that they were hung. They're dead, Keith. I told the men that I'd given the cows to the boys and that they had hung them for no reason. Then I beat all of them with my whip, beat them almost to death. I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, real sorry. I don't know what else to say. Both Indian men sat stunned, mentally frozen, trying to accept the finality of the words. Tiger's eyes misted as he said, in my heart I feared this, but it hurts no less hearing it from you now. I'd hoped someday that they would return. This is the end for me. They killed my son in the last war, and now my grandson. James was the only one left, and now there's no way to carry on my name. It is ended forever. It would be better if they come and kill me. I have no reason now to live. Tony Cypress said angrily, do you know where the men live who did this thing? If you do, we will find them and kill them. I was so mad I didn't even ask their names. Tobias responded, after I beat them with the whip, they threatened to come after me later. They know where I live, and if they ever come to my place, I'll kill them myself. This I promise. I hope you don't blame me for what happened. If I had known, I would have. Tobias' voice trailed off, and he never finished. He stood up suddenly, staggered a few steps, and fell. Zek rushed to him. He shook him and said, Papa, Papa, what is it? What's the matter? Tobias shivered as if cold, and sweat poured from his face. He tried to speak, but then he couldn't. Then his glazed eyes locked into Zek's, begging for help. Zek brushed sweat from his father's forehead, and then he looked to Keith Tiger, please, somebody do something. Keith Tiger said, when you came into the Chickie, I thought Tobias looked ill. How long has he been this way? Ever since Punta Rasa. He begged to turn back, but he wouldn't. He wanted to bring you the cows. Can you help him? Do you know what's wrong? Tiger put his hand on Tobias' forehead. It is malaria. We've seen it many times. Then he turned to Tony Cypress. Get the medicine man and tell Lily to bring blankets. Quickly, he is very sick. Don't let him die, Zek pleaded fearfully. If I had known he was this sick, I would have tied him with ropes and taken him home. Mama could have nursed him. Do not blame yourself, Tiger said, putting his arm around Zek, trying to calm him. It would have happened no matter where he was. It is best he is here. The medicine man can help him more than anyone. He knows what to do. He will do all he can to save him. The medicine man was in his 50s, tall and lean, with gray hair that came down to his shoulders. He wore a knee-length dress only, and around his neck there was a deerskin pouch, the sacred medicine bag, a symbol of his power. Zek watched constantly, hovering, asking questions that were ignored, becoming a nuisance, told time and again to move away, but refusing to do so. A bubbling pot sat next to the chickie, brewing a deep red liquid made of roots and herbs and the bark of a gumbo limbo tree. Lily held the blankets tight around Tobias as the medicine man lifted him up and forced the brew down his throat. Then he packed his forehead with lily pads made with cool pond muck. For a day and a night, Zek circled the chickie like a wolf stalking a herd until finally Keith Tiger came to him and said, "There is no need for you to do this. It will not help. And soon you will have 2 sick men instead of 1. Go, get food and rest. Leave your father to the medicine man and Lily. If there's a change, we'll tell you." The old woman in the cooking chickie gave Zek a gourd bowl of sufki. He went to the far side of the clearing and sat on a log alone, absently chewing the hot gruel. He was not aware that someone was beside him until she said, "Don't fret so. They will make your father well again. The medicine man has great power." Zek put the bowl down and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were here." The girl was 16, slim and firm, with black hair that swirled down to her hips. She had a thin mouth, high cheekbones, and oriental eyes, the look of a pure Seminole. She said, "I am Tawanda Cypress. Willie was my brother." Zek flushed with guilt when she said it, feeling uneasy as if the accused without the words being spoken. He said, "I'm sorry. I offered to ride with them, but he wouldn't let me. If I had gone anyway, he would be here now." "You don't know this to be true. It's impossible. They would have killed you too, just being with James and Willie. I don't judge you as I judge those men who did such a terrible thing." Zek looked at her closer, noticing she was very pretty. Something was different about her. Something he could not at once place, and then he realized what it was. He said, "The night James and Willie spent in our camp, we rode the prairie together, and they told me many things about life here. You don't speak like they did or the others." She smiled. "Does it show that much?" "I spent 3 months with a missionary and his wife who were camped west of here, near the 10,000 Islands. They were teaching me to read and write, and I suppose I took up some of their ways of speaking. My father says someone among us should learn to write like the white man's language, that it could be helpful someday, and he sent me there. They also instructed me in the Christian way, but I'm confused about that. I cannot understand why Christians kill for cattle." "I can't answer that for you," Zek said. "I don't understand it myself, but not all white people are Christians, and not all white men will kill for a cow. My papa would never do it, and I wouldn't either. Papa almost beat those men to death for what they did, and I would have shot them for sure if Skillet hadn't grabbed me and taken my rifle." "Can you read and write?" "No, I've never had learning. Mama can do some, but Papa can't. There's no time or use for such things on cattle drives. All you need to know is how to count heads and money. I'll go back soon and stay a while longer. Maybe someday I'll be able to teach you. Then we will both know how." "How come you're not afraid to stay with strangers?" "I was at first, but they're very kind people and they'd never harm me. Their camp is also very hidden from others. Father came on it one day while hunting and became friends. I guess I ought to go back now and see how Papa is doing." Zek said, starting to get up. "You love him very much, don't you?" "Yes. We've done things together ever since I can remember. We had some bad times, and he brought us through it. I don't know what me and Mama would do without him." You can't help him now by getting in the way of the medicine man and Lily. Let them do what they must. Stay here with me for a little while longer. I enjoy talking with you." "I suppose you're right," Zek agreed. "But if I can't help it, if we were at the house now, Mama would run me out with a broom. But I've never seen Papa this sick. It scares me." "Would you like to see the great marsh?" she asked, trying to steer his mind to something besides Tobias. "I can show it to you." "Is that the place James and Willie told me about? They said there's nothing else like it." "Yes. We call it Oki, the river of grass. It would be a shame for you not to see it while you're here. If we leave now, there's time to go there and return before nightfall. I know the way well." "Well, then let's do it. Let's stay out of the way for the rest of the afternoon. I think the medicine man wanted to put me in the cooking pot with that stuff he's brewing." They walked to where Ishmael was tied, and when Zek picked up the saddle, she said, "We don't need that. It's better without it. You put I'll put you on first and then get on behind me, Zek said, throwing aside the saddle. An Indian woman would never do such a thing, Tawanda said teasingly. We ride behind the man, not in front. If that's what you want, it's fine with me. Zek leaped onto the horse and then he took her hand and pulled her up behind him. As they started out in the clearing, she held on as tightly as possible. Zek, following her instructions, they rode deeper and deeper into the swamps, skirting islands of ferns taller than Ishmael, passing through myriad knees surrounding the giant trees. When finally they came to a narrow stream, she said, Stop here, tie the horse. We will go on in the canoe. On the bank there was a long dug-out cypress canoe and 2 thin poles. They pushed the canoe into the water. Then Zek stood in front and Tawanda in the rear, and they pulled the slim craft down the creek. At first it was tricky for Zek, and he almost lost his balance. Tawanda laughed at him until he finally gained confidence and pushed the canoe with ease. The stream twisted and turned, sometimes just wide enough for the canoe to pass, and several times it led into small ponds, covered with lily pads where turtles and alligators moved away as they glided by. Then suddenly the swamp ended, as if a line had been drawn to the separate swamp from marsh, and looming before them was Pehe Oki, a land so overwhelming in its vastness it caused Zek to blink his eyes in wonderment. Sawgrass stretched on and on, broken only by small island hammocks of hardwood trees and cabbage palms. Flights of egrets and herons drifted for miles, dwarfing what Zek had seen in Okeechobee or elsewhere. He continued, staring at Tawanda, saying, You're one of the few people to ever see this besides an Indian. What do you think of it? It seems like the whole world out there. How far does it go? To the sea in the south. It is many days' journey from here to the end of it, and it's very difficult pushing the canoe through the sawgrass. Sometimes the grass is taller than 2 men. When our people make the journey, they push down the grass and sleep on it at night, and sometimes snakes crawl in with you. There are also many alligators out there and crocodiles, too. I'd like to cross it someday, Zek said. Would you go with me and show me the way? I would if you asked, but it's not a good place for women. We'll go a bit further now, and then we should turn back. As they pulled the canoe, Zek watched with interest as an Everglade kite glided over them. Its huge wings extended, moving so slowly it seemed to be suspended in midair. Then a flight of small birds swooped in and harassed it, diving and pecking until finally the kite shot downward into the sawgrass and disappeared. The canoe sliced like a knife through the dense grass, and when Zek reached out and touched it with curiosity, blood oozed from his cuts on his hand. They circled one small island and then returned to the creek. When they reached the place where Ishmael was tied, they pulled the canoe back onto the bank. Zek said, I'm glad you brought me here, Tawanda. I'll always remember this place. He mounted Ishmael and lifted her behind him, and they rode back towards the village. The sun sank rapidly as they approached the village, and already nighthawks swooped about, zigzagging crazily as they chased mosquitoes. She followed him to the chickie and stood behind him as he looked down at his father. There was no change in Tobias. The medicine man and Lily were hovering over him, paying no heed to Zek and Tawanda. Zek knew it would be useless to question them, so he turned and walked out. One of the cows had been slaughtered while they were gone, and the smell of roasted beef drifted from the cooking chickie. Tawanda prepared 2 wooden plates for them. Then Zek followed her to the edge of the clearing. They sat on the ground just at the point where the fire's shadows faded into darkness, eating silently. Tawanda then said, We're breaking a seminal rule. An Indian woman does not sit beside a man while eating. Tawanda got up suddenly and said, I'd better go to the chickie now before my father comes looking for me. Zek sat by himself for a while, then took his blanket and placed it beside the chickie where his father rested and tossed relentlessly. The medicine man was gone, but Lillian was still there, changing the pads that cooled Tobias' face. The next morning, Tawanda fixed a breakfast of Kunti biscuits and fried beef strips, and he ate them eagerly. He returned to the chickie and sat by his father, ignoring her. She understood and said nothing. At noon, the fever broke, and Tobias sat up and sipped a cup of beef broth. He smiled at Zek and then laid back down and drifted into a calm sleep. Zek's spirit soared as Keith Tiger said to them, Tobias will be fine now. He's past the worst of it. In a few days, you'll be able to take him home. I know your people are worried. The words caused Zek a new concern that had not come to his mind while Tobias was so ill. His mother would be frantic with worry if they did not return soon. There was no way anyone from the hammock could ever find them here in the small village in the great cypress swamp. He continued hovering over the chickie, again making a nuisance of himself, until finally Lily spoke the only words she said in 3 days. "Go away and let us take care of him. You are worse than a puppy." Tobias gradually gained strength, getting up and walking a few steps at a time, and then eating solid food. He had become even more thin, and his clothes hung on him like sacks. On the morning of the 6th day, he said to Zek, "How long have you been here? I don't remember much since the day we arrived." "Almost a week, Papa." "A week? Good heavens, Emma will be worried sick. We'll have to leave in the morning." "Are you sure you're strong enough to ride, Papa? I could go to the hammock and tell them you're fine and let's stay here and rest. Then I would come back for you. I couldn't leave while you were so sick." No, I'll be fine. We'll go back together." Keith Tiger spoke up. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you wish, Tobias. But if you leave, you must ride easy and not push yourself. See if you can find a resting spot at a trading post. It's where the soldiers used to go for malaria." "I'll do that, and I truly thank you for what you've done for me." "It is we who owe you thanks. The cows and rifles will save our people. Is there anything you wish from us in return?" "My life is enough, but there's something Zek wanted if you could spare it. Dogs. Some rustlers killed the wolf dogs you gave us." "That is no problem. We have puppies and you can take your pick." "No," Zek said quickly. "James promised me some dogs he called leopards, but if I took them now, they'd remind me of him and Willie. I couldn't stand it. I don't want dogs." "I understand," Keith Tiger said. "It will be as you wish." "I thank you just the same," Zek said more calmly, not wanting the Indian to think he didn't appreciate the offer. "What's the name of the medicine man who treated me?" Tobias asked. "I hadn't even thanked him." "His name is Miami Billy," Tiger responded. "He is out gathering roots and bark to make medicine for you to take with you on your trip home. He will return soon. Tonight we will have a celebration of your recovery, Tobias. We will roast the tail of an alligator. This afternoon I will test the Winchester again against a gator's hard skull. You will enjoy the feast." All of the Indians were in a festive mood at the huge chunk of meat roasted on a spit over the fire. Zek and Tawanda again isolated themselves from the others and ate together, and the alligator was as good to Zek as the first chicken he tasted in Puna Rasa. Tobias was tired and went to bed immediately after eating, and soon the village became quiet as everybody drifted into chickies. Zek was almost asleep when Tawanda came silently and lay down beside him. He put his arms around her, absorbing her warmth. She pressed closer, facing him, and sleep became Sleep came as they clung together. Neither of them were aware when their father came from the shadows and looked at them briefly, seeing them asleep together like children, then turning and going away. The next morning, as they were exchanging final goodbyes, Keith Tiger said to Tobias, "Do not go back the way you came. It's too difficult in the custard apple forest. Go to the east side of the Okeechobee near the ocean. There are pine lands there and open prairies. It'll be easier for you." Tobias mounted the horse very carefully and steadied himself, still weak but determined to ride. Zek and Tawanda glanced at each other, their eyes meeting in silence, understanding that he would return, but no tears came to Tawanda's eyes. To cry at parting would not be the way of an Indian woman. They looked back and waved as they entered the woods. At the sight of Tawanda became etched in Zek's mind. She looked small and alone as the early sunrise caught in her raven hair. Tobias then said, "Let's ride now. We've got a long way to go." They moved slowly, stopping often to let Tobias rest and sip the medicine Miami Billy gave him. And when they rounded the east shore of the Okeechobee, it was as Keith Tiger said, the pine, scrub, and palmetto prairie. Days stretched into a week, and soon they came to the marsh where the herd drowned on their first grazing drive. From here they turned northwest, going out of the way towards the trading post at Fort Drum to see if Tobias could purchase quinine. When they entered the settlement at noon, the street was deserted, and there was no one in the store except Turner. Zek hovered in the background as Tobias inquired about quinine and was told they had none, but it was on order and should be in soon. He waited until his father started out before going to the counter and said hesitantly, "Hello, Mr. Turner. I'm Zek McIvy. Is Glenda here?" "No, she's not. She's up in Jacksonville staying with her aunt so she can go to school." He then looked closely at Zek and said, "I remember you now. You were here last spring during a frolic. Glenda has spoken of you." Although he wanted to see her, Zek felt relief that Glenda was not there. This would give him time to sort out his feelings for her and for Tawanda before seeing her again. "Will she be coming back here soon?" "She'll be back here for Christmas frolic. Are you coming? I think she's expecting you." "Well, I don't know, Mr. Turner, but I'll try. Next time you write Glenda, would you tell her I came by to see her?" "Well, why don't you write her yourself? I can give you the address. I know she'd be glad to hear from you." "No, you can just tell her for me, if you will," Zek responded, not wanting to admit he couldn't write. "I don't know when I'll be back here to post a letter. I better go now. Papa's waiting for me outside." Turner was amused by Zek's awkwardness as he almost fell over a pickle barrel while walking rapidly from the store. Emma ran to them immediately when they entered the clearing, her cries of "Tobias, Tobias," bringing the others outside. Tobias dismounted quickly and hugged her, and then she said, "You've been gone so long I was worried about you, but I'm glad you're back now. We had a bad thing happen while you were gone." "What's that?" Tobias asked, anxiously, alarmed by the gravity in her voice. Frog spoke up first. "Bonzo died, Mr. McIvy. He took real sick on the way back from Punta Rasa. It was malaria. We've done everything we could for him, and for a while it seemed he got better, but on the first night back, he just up and went away." "That's too bad," Tobias said regretfully. "I'm really sorry to hear it. I wish that I could have been at least here for the funeral." "He's down by the river," Frog said. Miss Emma said words, and it was a proper burial. It surprised us all, and I sure hated it. Me and old Bonzo went through a lot together." Zek said, "Papa had it too, and that's why we were here so late getting home. He was sick, and he would like to have died, but a medicine man cured him." "Tobias," Emma exclaimed, grabbing his arm. "You had it too? I should have been here with you." "There's nothing to fret about it now," he reassured her. "The Indians looked after me real good. I still got some medicine Miami Billy made for me, and they're getting in some quinine at Fort Drum. All I need is a few days to rest, and I'll be fine." "Did you have trouble finding the Indians?" Skillet asked. "No, we all figured out they ended up in Cuba. It wasn't easy," Tobias said. "There were times I didn't think we'd make it." "We've seen things we won't believe," Zek said excitingly. "I walked on vines right over the top of the woods, and the cypress trees down there are so big they make everything here look like nothing. And I went to Paheoki." "What's Paheoki?" Emma asked curiously. "It's a place like no other else. We went there in a dugout canoe. Tawanda took me." Emma said, "Let's go in the house and I'll fix something to eat. Then I want to hear all about your trip and everything you saw." The entire group followed Tobias and Zek inside.